What's up, guys? Today we're going to be doing an awesome alternator upgrade. If you remember, if you've been around this channel for a little bit, you may have remembered I had done the Maxima Alternator Upgrade. That rose the stock 70 amp alternator up to a 90 amp alternator. The Maxima uses a 90 amp alternator. I believe that was from a 93, but I would go check the video out just to make sure. But today what we're going to go ahead and do is use a G35 alternator. And that should push us up to, I think it's 110 amps. Although some of the later ones are 140 if I remember correctly. But those ones have different pins, and so you have to kind of rewire them or whatever. So this one should just be plug and play with a little bit of adaptation for the bracket. But you can see this is it right here. I believe this is from a 2005. Here's the opening. There we go. Go ahead and pull this out real quick. Alright, so here is the alternator. You can see it does have a rib belt on it, so we're going to have to swap that out. But the most important thing right here is the electrical connection. You can see it is kind of like a square rectangle 2-pin. That is what we have on the Z already. It's what came stock. So this will just bolt right up to it. If you want to know, on the back here we have a positive post that goes to the positive on your battery. Again, it should have wiring already in your car for that. And then there are a few screw holes around here that are going to be case grounds. We'll go ahead and pull the old alternator off and look at it. And we'll see which wires need to be grounded. But what we're going to go ahead and do first is pull out the old alternator. If you have a stock car, you're going to have a fan shroud right here and a clutch fan. You're going to want to go ahead and remove those. It is a little bit of a pain. That's kind of the reason why I went to E-fans. It just gives a lot more space up in the front here. And I do have intercooler piping for my NA2T, but you don't necessarily need to run those through right there. I am, but that's just my setup. So what you're going to go on ahead and do is go ahead and remove. You don't have to remove necessarily this part of the fan shroud because it is pretty difficult to get to. You kind of have to take off the front bumper. But it comes off in two pieces, and you should be able to slide this piece out right here. It is a little tough to get to, but just keep working at it. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove this piece of intercooler piping right here, and we should have enough access to go ahead and remove the alternator. Alright guys, before we get started, the first thing we're actually going to want to do is go ahead and remove the negative battery cable. You can see I've got mine right here, down and out of the way. The reason this is because the positive post on the alternator can actually ground out really easily. I've done this before, and it is really, really not good. You don't want to do it. It can burn out your fusible link, so you don't want to do that. Just be safe and take off the negative battery on your cable, and then you won't accidentally be able to short it out, and you'll be all good. So go ahead and do that first, and then start disassembling. Alright guys, now that we went ahead and got everything out of the way, there are 3 belts that we need to take off. The first one is for the power steering over here. The second one is for the AC. Mine is routed a little bit different. Yours won't have this. And then the alternator is on the bottom. Now, if you have the 1984 through 1986 naturally aspirated engine, your alternator will actually be over here on this side instead of over there. The procedure is pretty much exactly the same. The only thing is it's swapped over. They did move it over on the 87 through 89. But when you're doing NA2T, you have to move it over. So that's why mine is on this side. But what we're going to go ahead and do is undo these belts. There is a bolt right here, and that is going to be the lock bolt. You're going to go ahead and undo that. And then back behind, there is it's really hard to see, but attached to that, basically it's just a threaded rod with a nut on it. That is the tensioner bracket. You're going to go ahead and undo that nut. Then you can just kind of pull on the belt, and it'll actually swivel the power steering pump inwards so that you can get the belt off. For the AC, we have a lock nut here, and then the tensioner nut right on top. Go ahead and undo those. And then the alternator, see if I can get a really good angle on it. On the bottom of it, you can see right there is the lock nut and the tensioner bracket. You're going to go ahead and undo the nut, or sorry, undo the bolt. Just loosen it and then undo the nut, and it will come off. And then you'll be able to get all of your belts off that way. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on. Alright, so right here we have the alternator tensioner bracket. So this is the little part that screws into the, this is the lock nut, right, or the lock bolt, I guess, to keep it from moving, and then this is the tensioner. And then this right here goes into the block. I'll show you over in just a second. But you're going to go ahead and undo this just to move the entire tensioner out of the way. You can see it's kind of grooved out right here. This is when I did the Maxima upgrade. I had to do that. to kind of get it to clear. So I imagine we're actually going to have to do a little bit more of that today, so it's a good thing to remove it anyways, just because larger alternators typically they infiltrate this space a little bit. Let me go ahead and show you. Right here, this was the little place where we took out that bolt for the bracket. There is one on the other side. You can see it's right there for if it's on the other side of the engine. And now we have the alternator hanging. It's got 2 bolts on top, one on the front and one on the back. And these are notoriously difficult to reach. So I would suggest getting a stubby 12 millimeter for the rear, because that one it's very hard to get to. And then the front, I believe, is also a 12, but you should be able to get to it with a regular wrench. A stubby, again, will probably help here, but it's just kind of how it is. It's hard to see on camera, but you'll be able to see it really easily in person. Right there is just a bolt, and then the back is the same way. So we're going to go ahead and undo those 2, and then this will let the alternator fall down. And once that happens, we can go ahead and unplug all of the electric connections to it. Alright, you can see we have the alternator mostly out. You can see there is the connection on the side. That's simple, just push and pull. Push the little tab down and pull it out. And then on the back, it's hard to see, and I really can't rotate the alternator all that well, but there's a positive terminal. It's just a stud with a nut on it. Go ahead and take that off. And then there should be one more wire connected to, it's just a ground. It's actually not too big, but I think that's either an 8 or a 10 millimeter, just like a little bolt that goes into it. And go ahead and remove that. Some of the older alternators, if it's an original Z alternator, it might have a little thing. It kind of looks like a capacitor. It's actually just a silencer for the electrical system. The original radios were very susceptible to electrical noise, and so it was just a silencer. There was one over here too. I think I took it out. Actually, you can actually kind of see it right down in there. Maybe you can see it. It's right there, that silver thing in the middle of the screen. But the point is, if it's holding you up, go ahead and just take it off. But I believe that one, the capacitor sort of thing, should just bolt back to the ground from the positive. So go ahead and just unbolt it. You really don't need it if you don't have the original radio anymore. But if you want to keep it, it really doesn't hurt. Just make sure you know how you took it off. So I'm going to go ahead and unbolt this, and we're going to take the alternator out. Alright, here's the old alternator. I just got it out. This is the positive battery terminal post. This was a 10 millimeter. And then this little black guy right here was actually the 8 millimeter I was talking about. It's a ground. This actually isn't, this bolt didn't come with the new one. You can see there's nothing here. But I believe this is the little post, but there's also these posts right there. Anywhere on this casing is a ground technically. So as long as that bolt will go into here, we'll go ahead and move it over and then stick it in. I already checked. This is the same distance here, so we should be good. Now the only other thing we need to do is change over this from a ribbed belt to a V-belt. So what we're going to go ahead and do is take this, put it in a vise, and then hit this bolt here with a impact. So I'm going to go ahead and set it up, and I'll take you with me. Alright guys, you can see we have the alternator clamped in our bench vise right here. So this is what we want to do. I put these wood blocks here because we don't want to damage the pulley. So we aren't using this, but we're going to put it on the core return. So we're going to want them to not, get upset that it's all damaged and everything, and they can't use it and not give us our money back. So what we're going to go ahead and do is put these wood blocks here to protect it. And now, this is actually a 24 for mine. I have a 24 millimeter socket on here, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit it with the impact wrench. I'm going to go ahead and hold the alternator with one hand while I use the impact wrench on the other, because as it undoes this, odds are that this alternator is just going to want to plop off, and we don't want that to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of carefully hold it while I undo it. If I remember correctly, last time I did this with the Maxima, it was actually extremely difficult to get it off. So fingers crossed we can get this and don't have to pull out like a blowtorch or anything. But I'm going to go ahead and zip this off and see what happens. You can see I got it off actually pretty easily. The impact gun and holding it in this vise made a really quick work of it. So there is the nut. This is the 24. I went ahead and did the same thing to the old alternator. It was also a 24, but that might have just been because it was a more modern Maxima. Your Z31 alternator might be a little bit different. But what I wanted to say is this is a spacer that you'll typically find inside the alternator like that, and it pushes the pulley up and off of it. So we're going to go ahead and take that off. And now if you look on this one right here, you can see it's got kind of a lip here that the old one didn't have. And when we put the spacer on, it doesn't fit over anymore. So if we put it on right now as it is, the pulley, that we're going to put on here would actually get pressed up against this outer lip right here, and it wouldn't spin freely. So what we're going to go ahead and do is fabricate either a spacer. You could probably buy a spacer. So if ahead of time you wanted to buy this and then get the measurements off of this and say, you know, I need a spacer this long and this deep. I made this one last time when I did this, so I went ahead and made it like that. I'm going to see if this one will fit. It's a little bit thicker than the one that comes off of the Z31 alternator. But if not, I'm going to go ahead and make a kind of a combination of these little spacers in order to get up off. And I'm also going to kind of compare the height that the pulley is, because technically you want this to be in line, exactly spaced from this point right here to that point right there, of what the old one was. So because this new one has a collar, just because we're pushing it out, maybe it doesn't want that, so maybe we'll have to shave off this collar or something. In that case, we're going to take the case apart in order to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and do some measurements, see what the easiest way would be, and I'll get back to you guys and see what we're going to do. Alright guys, I went ahead and determined that we're actually going to go ahead and want to shave down this lip right here. So it was really easy to get this apart. There's 4 bolts that go through the entire thing. They're 8mm. I used a little wrench like this to break it loose, and then something like this just because there's not a lot of space in this case here to get a lot of things out. But once I got those 4 out, it's just the top just popped right off. So you can see underneath here there's a bearing right there. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that we don't accidentally nick that or anything. But I'm just going to go ahead and use a grinding wheel like this. You could maybe use like a Dremel tool, but it's kind of a thick piece. So I'm going to go ahead and use this, and we're just going to shave it down. You can see the old one had a tiny lip right there. But we're pretty much just going to go ahead and make it flat because that's really all we need. We just want the spacer to press up against the bearing with a little bit of space coming out on top. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll go ahead and put it back together. Alright, you might be able to see that I went ahead and shaved it down. There is still a small lip, kind of how the old one was. But it actually looks really good, and I've already test fitted it with this spacer, and it fits over. And there is still a little bit of clearance you can see. So now what we can do is go ahead and put on the pulley. Now if you're going from a Z31 to this, what you're going to have to do is actually grind out a little bit of the center, because the new pulley shafts are actually a little bit larger. But if you did what I did and you went to the Maxima first, I already ground mine out, so swapping it over, I've already tested it, it's actually the same thickness. So I'm going to go ahead and take it, and if you don't remember, V-belts are actually 2 halves, so go ahead and just kind of grab them both and stick them on. I can do this, there we go. Perfect. And then get that little washer on top. Great. And now we're going to go ahead and make sure it spins freely. So you can see, actually, let's roll down here real quick. The back pulley is very close to the casing. So what I'm actually going to probably try to do is get a very small spacer and space out. It's not touching, but it's very close. So I'm going to go ahead and get a spacer and space it out just a tiny little bit, and I'll be right back. Alright guys, I went ahead and made a spacer out of just kind of like a, let me see if I have an extra one over here. It was, no I don't, it was just kind of like a washer thing. It was only about 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter thick. So now it sits off just perfectly. So what we're going to go ahead and do is go ahead and put the nut back on now. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and put a tiny little bit of Loctite. This is just insurance for us that it's not going to come off. Really it shouldn't. It doesn't face a lot of vibrations or anything. But we just want to make sure that nothing is going to happen while we're driving. So I'm just going to put a little bit on this. This is removable. It can be any type of Loctite. We're probably never going to take it off. You know, and if we do to swap it to another alternator, an impact should be just fine. So I'm going to put a few drops on here, torque it down. I'm going to hit it with a few oogas and a few doogas from the impact. We're not really going to torque it down too hard because it really wasn't on there too hard. This is going to have our back on anything. But we're just going to go ahead and do that, put it all together, and then we're going to go install it on the car. Alright, now what we're going to go ahead and do before we wire everything up, so we kind of have a little bit of space to work with this, we're going to go ahead and stick it in the car. We're going to hang it from the front and try to get the back on. Again, the back is pretty difficult to get to. If you're at this point, you know what I mean. But we're going to go ahead and make sure the bracket will fit. If you remember this tensioner bracket, you know, it's kind of iffy. I believe, if anything, it actually pushed the pivot point down this way. So we might actually have to extend this hole of some sort, or maybe even like cut this off and drill a new hole over here in order to shorten the bracket up. So I'm going to go ahead and test fit it and see how it looks, see if we're going to be able to use this as is. and we'll kind of go from there. Alright guys, so I realized when I put this in I didn't want to have to go and bolt it up 2 times because it's actually kind of a pain to do it on your own. It really helps if you have somebody hold the alternator up while somebody puts a bolt into the top mount. So what I went ahead and did is I started wiring it, and I realized the positive post on the back of this one is actually quite large compared to the stock little O-ring. So I went ahead and tried to drill it out, and this is actually what happened when I drilled it out. It became quite a tangled mess, as you can see. So I went ahead and just took this one off. You can see kind of undid it, and then chopped a little bit of wire off. And I went ahead and put this new one on. It looks a lot better, and it actually fits. So just be aware, you're probably going to have to do that. So when you get your alternator, take it to the store and find one of these eye hook kind of things that look like it'll fit. And then you can go ahead and wire this up. So I'm going to go ahead and finish putting this all together. I just need to put that ground strap back on. Then I can go ahead and hang it and see how the bracket fits. Alright guys, so you can see this is, I'm going to give you a perspective. The alternator is out right now, and that piece that I have attached to it is the piece that actually holds it to the block. It's the alternator mount of sorts. And as you can see, well, you can't really see that well, but when I was trying to put it in, what I was noticing is that it was trying to hit the block. The alternator is just a little bit thicker than the old ones, and so it was actually hitting the underside of that block. So I'll take it off and show you in just a sec. But basically there's 3 bolts that hold this mount on. You're going to want to go ahead and take those out while the alternator is out of the car because it's going to give you a little bit more room. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to shave a little bit off of it. I'll just kind of show you what I'm talking about in just a sec here. But we're going to go ahead and shave it so that the alternator will actually fit properly. Alright, so this is the block. This is the front right here. That is the front and that is the rear. And then you have these 3 bolts, one above the other and then off to the side. You're going to go ahead and take these out and take this bracket off. Now what I was talking about before is right underneath here. Let me rearrange it. So this is the front and this is the back. And what's happening is when we're trying to put the alternator on, it's actually swinging up and hitting right here on the side because it wants to rotate too much. So we can't really trim the alternator because that would be pretty bad for it. But we can go ahead and we're going to just take the grinder and just kind of cut out a chunk right here. I might try to use like sort of cutoff wheel to just kind of do a 90 and a 90, or I'll try to use that grindstone again and see how it does. This is, I think it's cast steel, so it's kind of probably going to be pretty tough, but let's go ahead and get at it and see if we can just make a little bit more space in here. Alright, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I did remove quite a big chunk of metal from there, so hopefully we'll be able to go ahead and put those 3 bolts back in, hold this to the block, then get that alternator up and mount it again. I think that was really the only thing that was holding us back. It wasn't allowing the alternator to get upwards enough because it was just hitting there. So I think that's all we needed to do. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in and go from there. Alright guys, so I was able to get the alternator in now that we made those bracket adjustments. It was really good. One thing that I did have to note is I had to buy some new bolts for the rear. So the front one went in just fine. These are M8 by 1.25, that's the thread pitch, and then by 35 millimeters, so they're 35 millimeters long. Basically, I guess just the rear portion of this alternator is thicker than the stock Z and the Maxima, so you just needed a longer bolt to go through it. The stock one wouldn't fit, even the one that was a little bit longer than the stock one wouldn't fit. So I went ahead and got these, and they fit perfectly. So if you're going to do this, go ahead and pick up an M8 by 1.25 by 35 millimeters. Now I'm going to go ahead, take that bracket, stick it on here, and see how everything looks. If you guys can tell, the adjustment point is very far in. So we're going to go ahead and figure out what that means for us and how we're going to go ahead and deal with that. Alright guys, so I've made a little bit of progress on the bracket front. This one right here is what the original bracket was, and it won't work. Basically, so say you put that in there, the new point is like right here. You know, it's really far in, so even if I moved this hole here, this thing still wouldn't reach far enough in to get it. So I'd need a longer one of these, and then I need to slot that out. So that is a possible solution if you want to go ahead and do that. Order the parts beforehand. You could probably get that to work. What I'm doing, this is, and I'm gonna probably do this, get a longer tensioner bolt, because my solution to it right now is kind of, I don't want to call it redneck, but it's kind of redneck. So this is how it sets up. It's So this bracket right here is actually from the driver's side alternator. So I have an 86 and it was an NA when I got it. So it had the alternator over on this side, which means I had a mirrored bracket, but because of the way the engine is built, it's actually a little bit shorter. Not by too much, maybe half an inch to an inch, but it made it just perfect. I went ahead and drilled a new hole in further, chopped the top off, and I flattened out the little curve. And one thing to note is this is backwards, right? Normally you would have the tensioner on the outside, but it is backwards. So what I'm going to have to do, and I'll show you it on the car in just a second here, I'm going to put some spacers in here in order to get out to the alternator, and I'm going to have to use, I'm using one of these 35mm nuts again, or the bolts, because it does have these spacers, so it's longer than it used to be. So I'm going to have to use a combination of nuts and washers in order to space it out properly so it stays straight. But it should bolt up straight for now. I'm going to go ahead and try to get one of these, and then I'll see what I can do on getting that for you guys as well, because I don't want you to have to do some janky stuff like this every time. But, you know, we'll see. I've got a big sheet of thick aluminum. Maybe I'll make some custom brackets just for this swap for you guys and stick them online. Drop a comment down below if you would be interested in that. They probably would not be too expensive, you know, kind of just a straight piece. You know, I'll figure it out, see if I can come up with a good solution. But this is going to be the temporary one. So I'm going to go ahead and get some nuts and bolts and space it out properly, and I'll show you it on the car. Alright guys, it actually took quite a while to get this made up, but here is the final bracket. So again, this is the one from if your alternator is on the driver's side for a US car, left-hand drive. So I don't know if you already had yours on the other side, how you do it. And I don't know what would work if you were putting the alternator on the driver's side. So say you're NA from 84 through 86 and you're doing the swap. I really couldn't tell you exactly how to do it. One thing I might suggest is buy a longer tensioner bolt. That might help you in the future if you needed to just slot it out really more. But this is what I went ahead and did. So this is the one that I took off the passenger side right there. And this one, I had tried flipping it upside down, right, so that it matched the same curvature. But the problem I was running into is the spacing. It went backwards from what it needed to be, right? So it normally would space from the block inwards, but this was spacing from the block outwards, and that was causing a lot of problems. So even when I stacked washers, it actually pushed the bolt out too far, and the bolt was hitting where the belt was supposed to go. So it wouldn't work. So I went ahead and did a lot more thinking, and I eventually figured out I'm going to flip this back over to the way it's supposed to be, and I'm going to trim down a bunch of this right here, and it's actually just going to go on kind of like that. So I'll show you it on the block. It actually looks pretty good, and it works really well with the way that this alternator is set up, because the old alternator had the mounting point and the tensioner point on opposite sides 180 degrees away from each other on the alternator. But this one, you know, it's offset to the side, so having it pulled downwards, it's actually perfect for tensioning it. I imagine that the actual G35 is actually pretty close to the way that this is set up. But I'll go and put it on the car and show you how it looks. But it fits really well. I did have to cut probably 2.5-ish inches off this side, and I had to shave it down, if you guys can kind of see that, try to get some of that space back. I might have to use a washer or two on this side just to space it still. But the bolt should no longer interfere with the belt, and that is the most important thing. So let me go ahead and mount it up, and I'll show you guys the final result. Alright, hopefully you guys can see this well enough. But basically, it just is going straight down right there. So I'm going to go ahead and tension it. It's going to pull it downwards, and it's going to be perfect for the way that this is set up, how it pulls it down. So we're going to go ahead and pull it downwards. The bolt is no longer in the way of the belt right there. And we should have plenty of swing on that to get it tight right where it needs to be. So I'm going to go ahead and tension this up, and we're going to go ahead and see how it did. Alright guys, I went ahead and got it all tensioned up, and it's holding a pretty good tension where it's at. I think if I were to do this again, I would have left that bracket right there just a tiny little bit longer, drilled the hole further up, and that would have given me a little bit more room because the tensioner is actually kind of maxed out where it's at. So even though we're at a good tension, if we ever had to go tighter, that would be a problem for us. We could sort of put a washer or two on the outside of it. That would push the nut back a little bit, and it would keep on the threads instead of running into the little not threaded part. But that would only get us maybe, you know, another millimeter or so of tension, which on this, because of the way it is set up, the geometry of it, it would be a decent amount. But that's just something to think about when you're doing this. Maybe give yourself a little bit more room at first than what I did. But there you go, guys. The only thing we have left to do is really just to kind of put all the belts back on and then any fans or intake that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave that up to you. You don't need me to tell you how to put your car back together. Just do the reverse of what you did taking it apart. So if you guys have any questions about this, drop it down below. I hope that this was very interesting. And obviously what you want to do now, if you don't have your intake piping apart like me, you want to go ahead and turn the car on and test it. If you have the stock volt gauge, look at the voltage, make sure it's nothing weird or crazy. But you know, I'm gonna have to at least put in my intake tube in order to do that, or else it would be very unhappy because it doesn't like running without a MAF. But yeah, there you go, guys. I hope this was really cool. I think that this is going to be a great upgrade in terms of the amount of power that we're going to be able to use for stuff like e-fans, or stuff like stereos, just any other electronics that we have in the car. I think that this is going to be a good upgrade for that. So if you guys have any questions, drop them down below. I'll try to answer them as best as I can, and I'll see you guys later. Alright guys, one thing real quick before you leave, I just wanted to say something I noticed while I was doing my power steering. If you look down in here, you can see there is the alternator, and there is the positive battery post. It's actually pretty close to the subframe now. It still has probably 3/4 of an inch of clearance, but it's a little close. So you can see what I did is I put a tiny rubber cap on it. That'll just kind of help insulate it from any possible sparks. Again, I don't think it's going to be able to spark. It really is almost 1/3 of an inch when the rubber cap is off. Sorry, 3/4 of an inch, 3/4. But just in case, you want to go ahead and put a rubber cap on that. Don't get any cheap rubber caps from places like AutoZone. Those will probably just break in about 5 months, like maximum. I had a few on here, and it cracked in half. So you want to get something good. They do sell vinyl caps. That is a good idea as well, or just get some really good quality rubber caps. But there you go, guys. Just wanted to say that real quick. You can do that while the alternator is still out off the hangers. That way you don't have to squirm your hands down through here and get it. But just something to think about when you're doing this. Alright, see you guys later.